The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Colorado Territory in 1868, making Abigail Langston's heart freeze in her chest. She knew, even before the rider came galloping toward her homestead, that her life had just shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Thomas was dead, ambushed while driving cattle to the next county over. At 26, with a 3-year-old daughter and miles from civilization, Abigail became a widow in the unforgiving wilderness they'd once called their future. "Madam," the young ranch hand said, removing his hat as he delivered the news that her husband of 5 years wouldn't be coming home. "I'm awful sorry." Abigail stood on the porch of the small cabin she and Thomas had built together, her golden hair lifting slightly in the warm breeze, her blue eyes dry but vacant. She felt her daughter Emma clutching at her skirts, confused by the stranger and her mother's sudden stillness. "Was it quick?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. The ranch hand nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes, madam. Rustlers. They didn't even take all the cattle, just shot him and ran off with a few head." That night, after she'd put Emma to bed with a story and promises that everything would somehow be all right, Abigail collapsed at her kitchen table. The homestead suddenly felt enormous and empty, despite being barely large enough for the 3 of them. 4 months of supplies, $50 hidden in the floorboards, and 200 acres that needed tending if they were to survive. Thomas had been so certain this land would be their legacy, their future. "I don't know how to do this alone," she whispered to the empty room. The next morning, she buried her tears along with her fear. She had a child to feed, a homestead to maintain. Thomas had taught her to shoot, at least, though she'd never been as comfortable with a rifle as he was. She could manage the vegetable garden, tend to their few chickens, and milk their single cow, but the larger responsibilities of running the homestead had always fallen to Thomas. 3 weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion. Abigail worked from dawn until well past dusk, her hands blistering then callousing as she struggled with tasks that had never been hers before. She slept fitfully, often startled awake by sounds in the night, her husband's rifle propped beside the bed. Emma asked for her father constantly, too young to understand the finality of death. By the 4th week, when the well pump broke, Abigail sat down in the dirt and wept openly for the first time since Thomas had died. "Mama, why are you crying?" Emma asked, her little hand patting Abigail's shoulder. "Because I'm tired, sweetheart," Abigail answered honestly, "but we'll be all right." She didn't know if it was a lie. The town of Elkhorn was a half-day's ride, and she couldn't leave Emma alone while she went for help, nor could she easily bring her daughter on the difficult journey. But without water, they wouldn't last more than a day or 2. The decision was made for her when, that afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Abigail immediately grabbed the rifle from inside the door and positioned herself on the porch, Emma safely behind her. "Stay back," she called out when the rider was within earshot. "State your business." The man reined his horse to a respectful distance away. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and weather-beaten, with a dark beard and eyes the color of a winter sky. His clothes were travel-worn but clean, and he wore his gun low on his hip like a man accustomed to using it. "Name's Ethan Porter, madam," he called back, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "Just passing through, looking for work, saw your place and thought you might need a hand with something." "We don't need any help," Abigail lied, her grip tightening on the rifle. Ethan's gaze flicked to the broken pump, then back to her face. He nodded slowly. "Understood, though if you'll pardon me saying, looks like you've got a problem with your water there." Abigail hesitated. Emma peeked around her skirts, curious about the stranger. "I can fix that for you," Ethan continued, his voice calm and steady. "Won't take more than an hour and then I'll be on my way, no charge." The suspicion in Abigail's eyes didn't waver. "Why would you do that?" Ethan shrugged. "My pa raised me to help folks when they need it, especially." He trailed off, clearly not wanting to presume, but Abigail knew what he saw, a woman alone with a child, clearly struggling. "Especially widows," she finished for him, a bitter edge to her voice. "Especially anyone who needs a hand," he corrected gently. "May I approach?" After a long moment, Abigail lowered the rifle slightly. "You can fix the pump, then you'll go." Ethan dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He tied his horse to the hitching post, then moved toward the well with slow, deliberate steps. "What happened to it?" he asked, kneeling to examine the mechanism. "It seized up this morning," Abigail replied, still keeping the rifle ready. "I tried to free it, but I think something's broken inside." Emma, curious and less wary than her mother, edged closer to watch Ethan work. "My papa could fix anything," she informed him solemnly. Ethan looked up at the little girl, his expression softening. "I bet he could," he agreed. "What's your name, little one?" "Emma, I'm 3.5. "Well, Miss Emma, would you like to help me fix this pump?" "I need someone with small hands to hold some tools for me." Emma looked to her mother for permission. After a moment, Abigail nodded reluctantly. She kept the rifle with her as she moved closer, watching Ethan's every move. True to his word, within an hour he had the pump working again. When he turned the handle and water gushed forth, Emma clapped her hands in delight. "There you go," Ethan said, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. "Should work fine now." Relief coursed through Abigail, though she tried not to show it. "Thank you, Mr. Porter." "Just Ethan is fine," he replied, standing and looking around the homestead with a practiced eye. Abigail could see him noting the sagging fence line, the woodpile that was dangerously low, the small garden that needed weeding. "You've got a nice place here," he observed neutrally. "It's ours," Abigail said, a touch defensively. "My husband and I built it together." Ethan nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "I should be on my way." He turned to go, but Emma tugged at his pant leg. "Are you hungry? Mama made stew." "Emma," Abigail admonished gently. "Mr. Porter is leaving." "But he fixed our water," Emma protested. "And you said we should thank people who help us." Caught in her own teachings, Abigail hesitated. The truth was, she was deeply grateful for the repaired pump. It had been the final straw in her mounting troubles. And despite her wariness, the man had been nothing but respectful and helpful. "You're welcome to stay for a meal before you go," she conceded reluctantly. "As thanks." Ethan seemed to consider refusing, but then nodded. "I'd be obliged." They ate on the porch, Abigail keeping a careful distance while Emma chattered freely, telling Ethan about her doll, her father's horse that had run off after he died, and how her mother cried at night when she thought Emma was sleeping. "Emma," Abigail scolded, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It's all right," Ethan said quietly. "Loss has a way of finding us all out here." Something in his tone made Abigail look at him more closely. There was a sadness in his eyes that seemed familiar, somehow the kind that comes from having your own world turned upside down. "You've lost someone too," she observed, surprising herself with the directness. Ethan nodded, setting down his empty bowl. "My wife and son. Cholera 3 years back in Kansas." The simple statement hung in the air between them, a bridge of shared understanding. "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "As am I for your loss, Mrs. Langston." "Abigail," she corrected, feeling it only fair after she'd addressed him by his first name. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Ethan stood to leave. "Thank you for the meal. It's been a long while since I've had home cooking that good." Abigail watched him walk toward his horse, a sudden panic rising in her chest. The pump was fixed, but there were a dozen other tasks that needed doing, tasks she couldn't manage alone. Pride warred with practicality as she stood. "Mr. Porter, Ethan," she called after him. "You said you were looking for work." He turned, waiting. "I can't pay much," she continued, the words coming reluctantly. "But I can offer meals and a place in the barn if you'd be willing to stay on for a week or two. There are repairs that need doing, and she faltered, hating the vulnerability in her voice. "I could use the help." Ethan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Are you sure about that, Mrs. Langston? A stranger staying on your property?" "Abigail," she reminded him. "And no, I'm not sure, but I'm also not sure how I'm going to keep this place running without help." "You seem decent and capable." The faintest smile touched his lips. "High praise indeed. It's what I have to offer, along with room and board." Ethan looked past her to the homestead, his gaze assessing. "I can stay for 2 weeks," he decided. Help you get caught up on the most pressing matters. After that, we'll see." Relief washed over Abigail, though she tried not to show it. "The barn has a small room off the side. It's not much, but it's dry. I've slept in worse places," he assured her. That night, after Emma was asleep, Abigail sat by the window, watching the small light in the barn where Ethan had settled in. Part of her wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, inviting a stranger to stay. But another part, the practical part that was determined to survive, knew she'd had little choice. "This doesn't change anything, Thomas," she whispered to her absent husband. "This is still our home, our future. I'm just doing what I must to keep it." But as she turned from the window, she couldn't help but feel that something had indeed changed, a shift as subtle as the turning of seasons, but undeniable all the same. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. True to his word, Ethan worked from sunrise to sunset, tackling the most urgent repairs first. Mending the fence line, splitting enough wood to last well into the winter, patching the roof where it had begun to leak, and rebuilding the chicken coop that had been damaged in a recent storm. Abigail worked alongside him when she could, learning from his quiet instructions. He never made her feel inadequate for not knowing how to do something, simply showed her patiently until she mastered it herself. Emma took to Ethan immediately, following him around like a shadow, chattering endlessly. To his credit, he never seemed annoyed by her constant questions and often found small tasks she could help with, making her feel important. "You're good with her," Abigail observed one evening as they sat on the porch after Emma had gone to bed. The night was cool but pleasant, stars speckling the vast Colorado sky. "Children are honest," Ethan replied, whittling a small wooden horse that was taking shape in his hands. "They say what they mean and they mean what they say. It's refreshing." "She talks about Thomas sometimes, asks when he's coming home," Abigail said softly. "I don't know how to make her understand." Ethan nodded, his knife pausing in its work. "My son was 4 when he died. Old enough to understand pain, not old enough to understand forever." He met her gaze in the dim light. "Emma will understand in her own time. All you can do is be honest with her." "Like you were with your son," I tried to be, he said, resuming his carving. "Told him his mama had gone to heaven, that she wasn't hurting anymore. Told him we'd be okay, him and me." His voice caught slightly. That was the lie. The admission hung in the silence between them, raw and honest. Abigail realized that in the 2 weeks Ethan had been there, he'd told her more about himself than she'd shared about her own life. Somehow, it felt easier to listen to his story than to expose her own pain. "What was your son's name?" she asked. "James," Ethan replied, a smile touching his lips at the memory. "But we called him Jamie. He had his mother's laugh, big and bold, like nothing could ever hold it back." Abigail smiled at the description. "Emma has her father's stubbornness and his eyes. She has your kindness," Ethan observed. "Not everyone's born with that." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "Thank you for all you've done here," she said, changing the subject. "I don't know how I would have managed otherwise." "You'd have found a way," Ethan assured her. "You strike me as the kind who always does." The 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4. Each time Ethan mentioned moving on, there was always one more task that needed doing. The barn door that wouldn't close properly, the vegetable garden that needed harvesting, the cow that suddenly refused to give milk until Ethan discovered a thorn embedded in her udder. October arrived, bringing with it cooler temperatures and the knowledge that winter wasn't far behind. One morning, Abigail found Ethan repairing the stone foundation of the cabin where it had begun to crumble. "This will hold through the winter," he said, not looking up from his work. "But come spring, you'll want to have it properly rebuilt." The words hung between them, an acknowledgement that he wouldn't be there in the spring. Abigail felt an unexpected pang at the thought. "Where will you go when you leave here?" she asked, passing him another stone. Ethan shrugged. "South, maybe, New Mexico Territory or Texas, somewhere warmer in the winter months." "Do you ever stay in one place?" "Not since Kansas," he admitted. "Found it easier to keep moving." Abigail understood the sentiment all too well. If not for Emma and the homestead, she might have done the same after Thomas died, packed up and fled the memories that haunted every corner of their home. "We're riding into town tomorrow for supplies," she said after a moment. "Would you come with us? I'd feel safer with you along." Ethan nodded, his expression betraying nothing of what he might be thinking. Of course. The journey to Elkhorn the next day was peaceful, Emmer riding in front of Ethan on his horse while Abigail drove the wagon. The little girl had been ecstatic about the trip, chattering non-stop about the peppermint sticks she hoped to get at the general store. Elkhorn was small as frontier towns went just a single dusty street lined with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. The arrival of a wagon was always noteworthy, and Abigail felt eyes on them as they pulled up in front of the store. "Abigail Langston," called Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, emerging from the shop with a warm smile. "We haven't seen you in ages, and who might this gentleman be?" Abigail felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the woman's curious tone. "This is Mr. Porter. He's been helping with repairs at the homestead." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened slightly, darting between them with obvious interest. "How kind of him, and how are you holding up, my dear? We were all so sorry to hear about Thomas." "We're managing," Abigail replied, helping Emma down from Ethan's horse. "Just here for supplies before winter sets in." Inside the store, Abigail became acutely aware of the whispers and glances. A young widow with a handsome stranger was fodder for gossip in a town as small as Elkhorn. She kept her head high, focusing on her list of necessities: flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, lamp oil, and a few other items they couldn't produce themselves. "I have a letter for you," Mr. Peterson said as he tallied her purchases. "Came about a month ago, but no one's been out your way to deliver it." He handed her an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Abigail tucked it into her pocket to read later. Ethan added a few items to their order: tobacco for himself and, to Emma's delight, 2 peppermint sticks. He also selected a small bolt of blue fabric that matched Abigail's eyes. "Emma mentioned your dress was tearing," he explained when Abigail looked at him questioningly. "Thought you might need something for mending." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught her off guard. "Thank you," she said softly. As they loaded the wagon, Sheriff Miller approached, his thumbs hooked in his belt loops. "Mrs. Langston," he greeted her, then turned his attention to Ethan. "Don't believe we've met. I'm Sheriff Miller." "Ethan Porter," Ethan replied, extending his hand. The sheriff shook it, his eyes appraising. "Just passing through?" he asked, helping Mrs. Langston with some repairs. Ethan answered evenly. "Her place needed some work before winter." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Very neighborly of you. Where are you from originally, Porter?" "All over," Ethan said. "Most recently Kansas." Sheriff Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. "Porter from Kansas. Name sounds familiar." Abigail felt Ethan tense beside her, though his expression remained neutral. "Common enough name," he remarked. "Suppose it is," the sheriff agreed, though his eyes remained suspicious. "You planning to stay in these parts long?" "Just until the homestead's ready for winter," Ethan replied. Sheriff Miller nodded again. "Well, you folks have a safe journey back." "Roads have been quiet lately, but there's always trouble to be found if you're looking for it." As they left town, Abigail couldn't help but notice how Ethan frequently glanced back over his shoulder. "Is everything all right?" she asked when they were well away from Elkhorn. "Fine," he replied, though his expression said otherwise. That night, after Emma was asleep, Abigail finally opened the letter she'd received. As she read, her face paled. "Bad news?" Ethan asked from where he sat by the fire, noticing her expression. Abigail looked up, her hands trembling slightly. "It's from the bank in Denver. Thomas took out a loan last spring to buy more cattle and seed. I didn't know. He never told me." She swallowed hard. "They're giving me until the new year to repay it, or they'll claim the homestead." Ethan set down his coffee cup. "How much?" $300, she whispered, the sum seemingly impossible, plus interest. In the flickering firelight, she saw his jaw tighten. "You've got the cattle he bought with it." Most were stolen in the raid that killed him. "We have 10 head left, the milk cow and the chickens. The harvest was good, but not $300 good." Abigail pressed her hands against her eyes. "Why wouldn't he tell me about this?" "Men sometimes think they're protecting their families by shouldering burdens alone," Ethan said quietly. I've made that mistake myself. Abigail looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the lines of grief and experience etched into his face. What am I going to do, Ethan? This land was everything to Thomas, it's Emma's future. Ethan was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. There's a cattle drive starting in 2 weeks from the Thompson Ranch south of here, he finally said. They're looking for hands. The pay is good, might be enough to cover part of what you owe. I can't leave Emma, Abigail said immediately. I wasn't suggesting you go, Ethan replied, meeting her gaze steadily. I was thinking I could. The offer hung in the air between them, unexpected and profound. Why would you do that? Abigail asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked away, back into the flames. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, he said simply. And because Emma deserves a chance at the future her father wanted for her. Something shifted in Abigail's chest, a wall crumbling, a door opening. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. Their eyes met across the small room, and for a moment, everything else fell away: the homestead, their losses, the uncertain future. There was only this connection, unexpected and undeniable. Think about it, Ethan said, standing. No need to decide tonight. After he left for the barn, Abigail sat alone, the letter clutched in her hand, trying to understand the tangle of emotions inside her. Gratitude, yes, but also something else, something that made her heart beat faster and her cheeks flush warm. Something she hadn't felt since Thomas first courted her years ago. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. She wasn't ready, not for these feelings, not for the complications they would bring. And yet they were there, undeniable as the changing seasons. The next morning, Abigail found Ethan chopping wood, his rhythmic strokes splitting each log cleanly. She watched him for a moment, gathering her courage. I've thought about your offer, she said when he paused to wipe his brow. And I'm grateful, truly, but I can't accept it. Ethan set down the axe, giving her his full attention. May I ask why? Because it's not your burden to bear, Abigail replied. And because there are other options I need to explore first. Such as, I could sell some of the land, she suggested, or perhaps find work in town. Ethan's expression darkened. Elkhorn doesn't offer much work for women besides the saloon or taking in laundry. Neither pays enough to clear that debt. Then I'll sell the cattle, Abigail said, lifting her chin, and some of Thomas's things, his saddle, his guns, and if that's not enough, then I'll figure something else out, she insisted. I've always found a way. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but my offer stands if you change your mind. That afternoon, Abigail rode out to check the cattle, needing time alone with her thoughts. The autumn sun cast a golden glow across the land, the aspens turning yellow against the evergreens. Despite everything, the beauty of the place still took her breath away. This land had been Thomas's dream, but it had become hers too. As she crested a small rise, something caught her eye: movement where there shouldn't be any. Reining in her horse, she squinted into the distance. 3 riders were moving slowly among her cattle, driving them toward the western boundary of her property, rustlers. Fear shot through her, followed by a surge of anger. Without thinking, Abigail urged her horse forward, the rifle Thomas had taught her to use clutched in her hands. She wouldn't lose these cattle, not when they represented her last hope of saving the homestead. Hey! She shouted as she drew closer. Get away from my cattle, the rustlers turned, startled by her approach. One of them, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, grinned meanly. Well, what have we here, a lady rancher? Those are my cattle, Abigail said firmly, raising the rifle. And you're trespassing on my land. The men exchanged glances, clearly amused by her bravado. Your land, is it? Said the pockmarked man. Heard this place belonged to Thomas Langston. He finally hired himself some help. Thomas was my husband, Abigail replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He's dead, shot by men like you while driving cattle to market. Something flickered in the man's eyes, recognition, perhaps. That a fact, well, that's mighty unfortunate for you, madam. But business is business, and these cattle are leaving with us. He started to turn his horse, gesturing for the others to continue driving the cattle. Abigail raised her rifle higher. I said, leave them be. The pockmarked man turned back slowly, his amusement fading to irritation. "Lady, you might want to reconsider pointing that thing at me. You're outnumbered, and I don't much care if you're a widow or not." Fear tightened Abigail's throat, but she held her ground. "I'm not asking again." The man's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, a shot rang out not from Abigail's rifle, but from somewhere behind her. The bullet kicked up dirt just inches from the rustler's horse, causing the animal to rear in panic. "The lady asked you to leave," came Ethan's voice, cold and dangerous, as he rode up beside Abigail. His rifle was aimed steadily at the pockmarked man. "I suggest you do as she says." The rustlers assessed the new threat, their expressions calculating. "2 against 3, the pockmarked man observed. "Still not good odds for you." "I've faced worse," Ethan replied evenly, "and I don't miss twice." There was something in his tone, an absolute certainty that made the rustlers hesitate. The pockmarked man studied Ethan more carefully, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Wait a minute, I know you," he said slowly. "You're Ethan Porter, the gunslinger from Kansas." Abigail's head whipped toward Ethan, surprise evident on her face. Gunslinger. The quiet, gentle man who'd fixed her pump and carved toys for Emma. Ethan's expression remained impassive. "Then you know I'm not bluffing. Take your men and go, now." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the pockmarked man slowly raised his hands in surrender. "No need for bloodshed today." "We're going," he glanced at Abigail. "But a word of advice, madam, a pretty widow alone on a homestead makes for an easy target. We won't be the last to come calling." With that, the rustlers turned their horses and rode away, leaving the cattle behind. Abigail's hands were trembling as she lowered her rifle. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, his voice returning to the gentle tone she recognized. "Yes," she managed, though her heart was still racing. "Thank you." She paused, searching his face. "The gunslinger from Kansas, is that true?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "It was a long time ago." "Is that why the sheriff recognized your name?" "Probably," he admitted. "Though I've done my best to leave that life behind." Abigail processed this revelation, trying to reconcile it with the man she'd come to know. "Were you going to tell me?" "Eventually," Ethan said, "once I figured out how to explain that I'm not that man anymore." His eyes met hers, earnest and troubled. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Abigail. After my wife and son died, I was lost, angry. I found work using the only skill I had left, being good with a gun. And now I'm trying to find a different way to live," he said simply. "A better way." They rode back to the homestead in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the cabin, Emma came running out to meet them, oblivious to the tension between them. "Ethan, Mama. Look what I found." She held up a small turtle, proudly displaying her discovery. Ethan dismounted, crouching to admire Emma's find. "That's quite a turtle, Miss Emma. Where did you find him?" As Emma launched into an elaborate explanation, Abigail watched them together, her mind whirling. The man who just faced down 3 rustlers without flinching was the same one now gently teaching her daughter about turtle care. The contradiction should have frightened her, but somehow it didn't. That night, after Emma was asleep, Abigail found Ethan on the porch, smoking his pipe and staring at the stars. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, sitting beside him, "to join the cattle drive." Ethan turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by the lamp light from inside. "And I'd like to accept," she said, "but I need to know something first." "Ask." Abigail took a deep breath. "Why are you really helping us? The truth, please." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. "When I first came here," he finally said, "I was just passing through, looking for temporary work before moving on. I've been doing that for 3 years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." He tapped out his pipe, gathering his thoughts. "But then I met you and Emma. Saw how hard you were fighting to hold onto this place, to give your daughter the future Thomas wanted for her. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" Abigail asked softly. "That life goes on," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion, "even after the worst happens. That maybe there's still a chance for something good to grow from the ashes." His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I'm helping because I want to, Abigail, because for the first time in 3 years I care what happens tomorrow." The simple honesty of his words struck her deeply. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "Then I accept your offer, but we do this together. You go on the cattle drive, and while you're gone, I'll sell what I can here. Between the two, we might just make enough to save the homestead." Ethan looked down at their hands, then back to her face. "Together," he agreed. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. Ethan rode to the Thompson ranch to secure his position on the cattle drive, returning with news that they'd be gone for a month, driving the herd to Denver. The pay would be $60, not enough to cover the loan, but a significant contribution. Abigail, meanwhile, took inventory of what they could sell. Thomas's saddle and guns were valuable, as were a few pieces of jewelry she'd brought from her family home in Missouri. It hurt to think of parting with these things, but they were just objects. The land, their future, was what mattered. The morning Ethan was set to leave dawned clear and cold, the first real hint of winter in the air. He stood by his horse, saddlebags packed, saying goodbye to Emma, who clung to his leg. "You'll be good for your mama while I'm gone?" he asked, kneeling to look her in the eye. Emma nodded solemnly. "Will you bring me something from Denver?" Ethan smiled, touching her cheek gently. "What would you like?" "A story," she decided. "A new one I haven't heard before." "I think I can manage that," he promised, standing. Abigail stepped forward, suddenly uncertain what to say. The past weeks had changed things between them, creating a bond she hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to define. "Be careful," she said simply. Ethan nodded, his eyes holding hers. "I'll be back as soon as I can." On impulse, Abigail stepped closer and kissed his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." A smile touched his lips, warm and genuine. "Lock the doors at night," he advised, "and remember what I taught you about the rifle." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, Emma waving enthusiastically until he disappeared from sight. The first week without him was surprisingly difficult. Abigail hadn't realized how much she'd come to rely on his presence, not just for the physical help but for the companionship. The evenings were the hardest when Emma was asleep and the cabin felt too quiet, too empty. During the day, she kept busy. She rode into Elkhorn with Thomas's saddle and guns, getting a fair price from the blacksmith who also dealt in used goods. She set aside some of the money for supplies, hiding the rest with what they'd already saved. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. The second week brought the first snowfall, just a dusting that melted by midday, but a reminder that winter was approaching. Abigail checked and double-checked their preparations. Grateful for all the work Ethan had done to make the homestead ready, the third week, trouble came calling. Abigail was hanging laundry when she saw the riders approaching 3 men, including the pockmarked rustler who'd tried to steal her cattle. Heart pounding, she hurried inside, barring the door and retrieving the rifle. "Emma," she called softly. "Come here, sweetheart." Emma looked up from where she was playing with the wooden horse Ethan had carved for her. "What's wrong, Mama?" "Nothing to worry about," Abigail assured her, trying to keep her voice calm. "But I need you to go to the secret hiding place like we practiced, remember?" Emma's eyes widened, but she nodded bravely. "Like a game of hide and seek, exactly," Abigail said, helping her daughter into the small cellar beneath the floor where they stored root vegetables. "Stay very quiet, just like when you're hiding from Ethan. Don't come out until I come get you, no matter what you hear. Promise?" "Promise," Emma whispered. Abigail closed the trapdoor, covering it with the rug just as pounding started at the front door. "Mrs. Langston," called the pockmarked man, "we know you're in there, just want to talk business." Rifle raised, Abigail approached the window, staying to the side. "I have no business with rustlers," she called back. "Leave my property," the man laughed. "Now, is that any way to treat visitors, especially when we've come with a generous offer?" "What offer?" Abigail demanded, though she already knew it would be nothing good. "Heard in town you're in some financial trouble. Bank loan coming due, is it?" The man's voice was smug. "We're prepared to take this whole place off your hands, $500. More than enough to pay your debt and start fresh somewhere else." Abigail's grip tightened on the rifle. $500 was far more than the homestead was worth in cash, though the true value was in its potential. These men wanted something else. Not interested, she called back firmly. Now leave or I start shooting. Don't be hasty, madam, the man replied, his voice hardening. Your gunslinger friend isn't here to protect you now. We could just take what we want. Cold fear slid down Abigail's spine. Sheriff Miller knows you've been rustling cattle. You really want to add murder to your crimes? There was a pause, then murmured conversation outside. We're reasonable men, Mrs. Langston, the pockmarked man finally said. We'll give you time to think about our offer. 3 days, then we'll be back and we won't be so polite. Abigail waited, heart hammering, until she heard the sound of horses retreating. Only then did she lower the rifle and retrieve Emma from her hiding place. Were those bad men, Mama? Emma asked, climbing into her arms. Yes, sweetheart, Abigail admitted, holding her tight, but they're gone now. That night, after Emma was asleep, Abigail paced the small cabin, weighing her options. She could ride to town for help, but the sheriff had limited resources and couldn't provide round-the-clock protection. She could try to hold out until Ethan returned, but that was still a week away, and the rustlers had promised to return in 3 days, or she could run. The thought settled heavy in her stomach. Running meant abandoning the homestead, Thomas's dream, their future. But staying might mean risking Emma's safety, and that was a chance she couldn't take. By morning, Abigail had made her decision. She packed only what they could carry: clothes, some food, Thomas's wedding ring, and the money they'd saved. With heavy hearts, she and Emma rode toward Elkhorn, leaving behind the home they'd fought so hard to keep. In town, Abigail went directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller listened to her story with a grim expression. I was afraid something like this might happen, he said when she finished. These men have been causing trouble all through the territory. They find vulnerable homesteaders, force them out, then sell the land to mining interests for a profit. Can you help? Abigail asked. The sheriff sighed. I can try to round up some men, ride out to your place, but I'll be honest, Mrs. Langston, I've got limited resources and these men are dangerous. I understand, Abigail said quietly. In the meantime, is there somewhere Emma and I can stay, Mrs. Peterson at the hotel will put you up, Sheriff Miller assured her. And I'll send a rider to try to intercept the cattle drive, let Porter know what's happening. The days at the hotel passed slowly, Emma confused and unhappy about leaving home, Abigail torn between fear for their safety and grief at potentially losing the homestead. She visited the bank, explaining her situation and requesting an extension on the loan. The banker was sympathetic but unmoved. The payment was due by January 1st, no exceptions. On the evening of the 3rd day, Sheriff Miller returned from riding out to the homestead, his expression troubled. They've set up camp on your property, he reported. 4 men now, all armed. They've helped themselves to your cattle and supplies. Abigail's hands curled into fists. So they're just going to take it. Everything we've worked for. I aim to gather more men, the sheriff assured her. Try to drive them off, but it might take time they didn't have. The bank deadline loomed just weeks away, and now rustlers had essentially claimed her land. Abigail felt despair threatening to overwhelm her. That night, as she tucked Emma into bed in their small hotel room, her daughter asked the question Abigail had been dreading. Are we ever going home, Mama? Abigail smoothed her daughter's hair, buying time to find the right words. I don't know, sweetheart. There are some problems we need to solve first. Emma frowned, processing this. Is Ethan coming back to help us? He fixes everything. I hope so, Abigail whispered, her own voice betraying her uncertainty. After Emma fell asleep, Abigail sat by the window, watching the quiet main street of Elkhorn. The saloon was the only building still lit up, raucous laughter occasionally drifting through the night air. She felt utterly alone, more so than even in the days immediately after Thomas's death. It was nearly midnight when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. A group of riders was coming into town, moving purposefully despite the late hour. As they passed beneath the street lamp outside the hotel, Abigail's heart leapt. Ethan was among them. Without stopping to think, she grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs. stepping out onto the boardwalk just as the riders dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Ethan saw her immediately, breaking away from the group to stride toward her, his face etched with concern. "Abigail," he said, reaching for her hands. "Are you all right?" "Emma, we're safe," she assured him, suddenly fighting tears of relief at his presence. "Emma's asleep upstairs." "How did you know to come back early?" "Sheriff's messenger caught up with us 2 days ago," Ethan explained. "I left the drive and brought some men with me." He gestured to the riders who were now gathering around them, friends who owed me favors. Abigail looked at the men, 5 in total besides Ethan, weathered and tough-looking but with respectful nods for her. "You left the cattle drive," she said, realizing what this meant. "The pay doesn't matter," Ethan cut her off, "not compared to you and Emma being safe." His eyes searched hers. "Tell me what happened." As Abigail explained about the rustlers' visit and their subsequent occupation of the homestead, Ethan's expression darkened. One of his companions, a tall man with a graying beard, stepped forward. "These the same men who tried to run off your cattle before?" he asked. Abigail nodded. "The one with the pockmarked face seems to be their leader." "Sounds like Frank Delaney and his gang," the man said to Ethan. "They've been working their way through Colorado for the past year. Bad business." Sheriff Miller emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. "Porter," he greeted Ethan with a nod. "Glad you made it back. Was just about to organize a posse in the morning." "No need to wait," Ethan replied. "We're ready now." The sheriff assessed the group. 7 against 4 isn't bad odds, but Delaney's men won't go quietly. "Neither will we," said one of Ethan's companions. A plan was quickly formed. They would ride out immediately, using the cover of darkness to approach the homestead, then confront the rustlers at dawn when they'd be least prepared. Sheriff Miller insisted on coming along, making it 8 against 4. "I'm coming too," Abigail said firmly. Ethan turned to her, clearly about to object. "Abigail, it's my home," she interrupted, "my fight, and I can shoot." She held his gaze, unwavering. "Emma will be safe with Mrs. Peterson." After a moment, Ethan nodded, recognizing the determination in her eyes. "Stay close to me," was all he said. An hour later, after arranging for Emma's care, they were riding through the darkness toward the homestead. Abigail felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened, she was no longer facing this threat alone. They reached the edge of her property just before dawn, dismounting to approach on foot. In the gray light of early morning, Abigail could make out her cabin, smoke rising from the chimney. Outside, 4 horses were tethered near the barn. Ethan laid out the plan in whispers. Sheriff Miller and 2 men would approach from the back, Ethan and the others from the front. Abigail would stay with Ethan. "Give them a chance to surrender," the sheriff insisted. "I want them alive if possible." Ethan nodded, though something in his expression made Abigail wonder if he shared that preference. As the first rays of sunlight crested the distant mountains, they moved into position. Ethan, Abigail, and 2 others crept toward the front of the cabin, using the woodpile for cover. When everyone was in place, Sheriff Miller called out, "Frank Delaney, this is Sheriff Miller from Elkhorn. You and your men are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Silence followed, then the cabin door opened slightly. "We ain't done nothing illegal, Sheriff," came Delaney's voice. "Just camping on abandoned property." "This property belongs to Mrs. Langston," the sheriff called back, "and you know it. Come out now or we're coming in." The door opened wider and Delaney emerged, hands raised but a smirk on his face. "No need for violence. We were just leaving anyway." He glanced around, spotting Abigail beside Ethan. "Well, look who's back, and she brought friends." "Step away from the door," Ethan ordered, his rifle aimed steadily. "Tell your men to come out slowly." Delaney's eyes narrowed. "Porter. Should have known you'd come running back to protect your woman." "The men, Delaney," Ethan repeated, ignoring the jab. "Now, sure," Delaney said easily. He turned his head slightly toward the cabin. "Boys, come on out, we've got company." What happened next unfolded in seconds. As the door opened wider, Delaney dropped to the ground, drawing his gun in the same motion. A shot rang out from inside the cabin, and one of Ethan's men fell with a cry of pain. "Get down," Ethan shouted, pushing Abigail behind the woodpile as gunfire erupted from all sides. Heart pounding, Abigail gripped her rifle, trying to steady her hands. Beside her, Ethan was returning fire with calm precision, his face set in grim determination. From the back of the cabin came more shots as the sheriff and his men engaged the rustlers. "Stay here," Ethan told her during a brief lull in the firing. "I need to get closer." "No," Abigail grabbed his arm. "It's too dangerous." Ethan met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. "Trust me," he said simply. Before she could protest further, he was moving, darting from cover to cover with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. Abigail watched, her heart in her throat, as he worked his way closer to the cabin. The gunfire intensified, then suddenly stopped. In the ringing silence that followed, Abigail heard Ethan's voice, cold and commanding. "It's over, Delaney. Drop the gun." Peering around the woodpile, Abigail saw Ethan standing at the corner of the cabin, his revolver aimed at Delaney, who was on one knee, blood staining his sleeve. The other rustlers were either down or had their hands raised in surrender. "You think this changes anything, Porter?" Delaney spat, his gun still in his hand though lowered. "You can't protect her forever, and that bank loan's still coming due." "That's not your concern anymore," Ethan replied evenly. "Drop the gun." For a tense moment, it seemed Delaney might try one last desperate shot. Then, with a curse, he let his weapon fall to the ground. Sheriff Miller and his deputies quickly moved in, securing the rustlers. One of Delaney's men was dead, another badly wounded. On their side, Ethan's friend had taken a bullet to the shoulder but would recover. As the sheriff led the prisoners away, Abigail surveyed the damage to her home. The front window was shattered, bullet holes peppered the door, and inside, furniture had been overturned and possessions strewn about. But the structure itself was sound, and most importantly, it was hers again. Ethan found her in the bedroom, collecting Emma's scattered toys from where the rustlers had tossed them aside. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Abigail nodded, though tears threatened. "It's just things, they can be mended or replaced." She looked up at him. "Thank you for coming back." Ethan stepped closer, helping her gather the toys. "I'll always come back, Abigail, as long as you want me to." The simple promise undid her composure. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over as the events of the past days, the fear, the uncertainty, the relief caught up with her all at once. Without hesitation, Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. His embrace was warm and solid, a shelter in the storm she'd been weathering for too long alone. "I was so afraid," she admitted against his shoulder. "Not just of them, but of losing everything: the homestead, Thomas's dream, Emma's future." "You haven't lost anything," Ethan assured her, his hand gently stroking her hair. "And you won't." Abigail pulled back slightly to look at his face. "The loan is still due." "Without the cattle drive pay, I have savings," Ethan interrupted. "From my previous work, more than enough to cover the loan." Surprise flickered across Abigail's face. "Ethan, I can't accept that. It's not a gift," he said firmly. "It's an investment in this land in the future." He paused, something vulnerable entering his expression. "In us, if you'll have me." The words hung between them, a question and a promise all at once. Abigail felt her heart beating wildly in her chest as she realized what he was offering: not just financial security, but a life together. "A new beginning. What about your wandering?" she asked softly. "You said you never stay in one place." "I never had a reason to," Ethan replied, his eyes holding hers. "Until now." Abigail thought of the months since he'd arrived, how he'd fixed the broken pump, taught Emma to ride, faced down rustlers, and come back when they needed him most. She thought of the evenings on the porch, sharing stories and silence alike, of the way her heart lifted whenever he smiled. "I think," she said slowly, "that Thomas would want Emma and me to be happy, to have a secure future." "And what do you want, Abigail?" Ethan asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you to stay," she whispered. "I want us to build something here together." The joy that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but when Abigail's arms slid around his neck, it deepened into something more: a promise, a beginning, a future unfolding before them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he said, a smile in his voice, "I don't know much about farming." Abigail laughed, the sound bright in the bullet-riddled room. "Luckily I do, and you're good with repairs." "A fair partnership, then," Ethan agreed, his eyes twinkling. "Though there's one more thing I need to ask you properly." He stepped back, still holding her hands, and to Abigail's surprise, lowered himself to one knee. "Abigail Langston," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion clear in his eyes. "I know I can't replace what you've lost. I wouldn't try to, but if you'll have me, I promise you'll never face the future alone again. I'll be by your side, supporting you, protecting you and Emma, loving you both for as long as I live." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Abigail's vision again, but these were different tears of joy, of hope, of a heart healing and opening to love again. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, Ethan Porter, I will marry you." He rose and pulled her into his arms again, both of them laughing and crying at once, the shadows of the past finally giving way to the promise of tomorrow. 2 days later, they rode back to Elkhorn together to retrieve Emma. When they told her the news, her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Does this mean Ethan is staying forever?" she asked, bouncing excitedly. "Forever and ever," Ethan confirmed, lifting her into his arms. "And you'll be my new papa," Emma persisted, her small hands framing his face. Ethan's expression softened, a hint of tears in his eyes. "If that's what you want, Miss Emma, I'd be honored." "I think you should be," Emma declared seriously, "because Mama smiles more when you're here." Abigail felt her cheeks flush as Ethan glanced at her, a tender smile playing on his lips. "Is that so?" he asked. "It's definitely so," Abigail confirmed, stepping closer to embrace them both. They were married in Elkhorn's small church a week later, a simple ceremony attended by the few friends they'd made in the area. Sheriff Miller gave the bride away. Emma served as flower girl and Mrs. Peterson baked a cake to celebrate the occasion. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, for it was truly theirs now, the loan paid and the deed secure, Ethan pulled something from his pocket and handed it to Abigail. "I never did give Emma that story from Denver," he said, "but I brought something for you instead." It was a small wooden carving of their cabin, expertly crafted with tiny details like the rocking chair on the porch and the flower boxes under the windows. "It's beautiful," Abigail murmured, tracing the miniature roof with her finger. "I started it before I left," Ethan admitted. "Finished it on the ride back, thought it might remind you that no matter where I go, this is home now, where you and Emma are." Abigail leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun set over the land that had once been just Thomas's dream, then her burden, and now was their future together. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when Thomas died, I thought my future died with him. I couldn't see past each day's struggles, couldn't imagine anything beyond survival. And now," Ethan asked, his arms sliding around her waist. Abigail looked up at him, at the love shining in his eyes, and smiled. "Now I see possibilities I never imagined. A family growing, the land prospering, years unfolding before us full of challenges, yes, but also joy." She touched his face gently. "You didn't just help me save this homestead, Ethan. You helped me believe in tomorrow again." Ethan turned his head to kiss her palm. "I once told you I'd make sure you never lost your future," he reminded her. "That's a promise I intend to keep." "Our future," Abigail corrected softly. "Yours, mine, and Emma's together." As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, they sealed that promise with a kiss two souls who had each lost everything, finding in each other the courage to love again, to build again, to believe again in the promise of tomorrow. 5 years later, the homestead had grown into a prosperous ranch. The original cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, Emma, now 8, and her 2 younger brothers, Thomas and James, named for the loved ones Abigail and Ethan had lost. The cattle herd numbered over 100 head, and the harvest from their fields was abundant enough to sell the surplus in Elkhorn, which itself had grown into a proper town with a school Emma attended. On the anniversary of their wedding, Ethan took Abigail for a ride to the highest point on their property, a scenic overlook where they could see the full extent of what they'd built together. "You ever miss your wandering days?" Abigail asked as they sat side by side, horses grazing nearby. Ethan considered the question, his gaze sweeping over their land, the cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, the barn where James had been born during a summer thunderstorm, the corral where he was teaching Emma to rope, the fields they'd planted together. "Not once," he answered truthfully. "Everything I could ever want is right here." Abigail smiled, leaning into his embrace as the sun began its descent, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. The future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the land they called home, a future they would face together. Come what may, secure in the love they'd found when neither was looking for it. A love that had transformed loss into hope, solitude into family, and uncertainty into the most precious certainty of all. That whatever tomorrow might bring, they would meet it hand in hand, heart to heart, their separate journeys now and forever one.